Complex PTSD Recovery: Understanding and Treating Complex Trauma Using EMDR and Concepts from Individual Psychology. Written by Brittany Forrester. Narrated by Hadi Hajjar. Introduction. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the emblematic mental illness of the early 21st century. PTSD marks the current era as much as anxiety dominated the post-World War II period and depression the 2 decades after the third edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders was developed in 1980. Traumas and their psychological consequences are the stock and trade of daytime talk shows, popular movies, television documentaries, and news programs. A large industry has developed that encompasses trauma specialists, grief counselors, lawyers, and claimants. Laypersons routinely use the term PTSD to describe their reactions to stressful events. As recently as 1980, the sorts of events that were considered to be traumas were limited to extreme stressors, such as military combat, rape, severe assault, and natural or man-made disasters. Since that time, the range of traumas has expanded to include hearing hate speech, learning of a relative's death, or watching a catastrophe unfold on television. Virtually the entire population experiences such as traumas during their lifetimes. The number of individuals who develop PTSD after these events have also soared. In contrast to the initial studies of how many people suffer from PTSD, which showed rates of only about 1%, more recent reports indicate figures approximately 10 times that number. Western and increasingly most cultures now routinely assume that people who are exposed to traumas will develop serious and recurrent negative psychological consequences. Mental health specialists typically predict that a pandemic or traumatic psychic conditions will arise after man-made or natural disasters. As a result, trauma counselors have become entrenched in schools, work organizations, hospitals, and police and fire departments to deal with the expected psychological results of disturbing experiences. At the extreme, some instructors in colleges and universities use trigger warnings on reading material they feel might precipitate PTSD among their students. PTSD has become so embedded in current culture and medicine that it is easy to forget that the idea that traumas can cause mental disorders is a relatively recent notion. In contrast to depression, mania, and other conditions that have been recurrent medical and psychiatric concerns, PTSD and its predecessor diagnoses, soldier's heart, railroad spine, shell shock, and combat neurosis, only became recognizable psychiatric disorders in the latter part of the 19th century. Even then, claims of psychological trauma were commonly subject to suspicion and efforts to discredit them. The present expectation that dire and enduring psychological consequences will develop after stressful events stands in stark opposition to the resistance that traumatic diagnosis faced from both the medical establishment and the general culture for most of their brief history. The relative newness of traumatic diagnosis contrasts with the perpetual presence of the kinds of events that produce PTSD. Combat, rape, severe physical assaults, disasters, serious accidents, and the like have been consistent occurrences throughout history. Indeed, violent conflicts, early deaths, sexual abuse, and disastrous natural calamities were far more common in past centuries than at present. This raises the question of why PTSD has been considered to be a widespread medical problem only in recent periods. Perhaps more than any other diagnostic category, PTSD is a vehicle for showing major historical changes in conceptions of mental illness. The inherent link between PTSD symptoms and traumatic events roots this condition in social and cultural forces to an unusually great extent among mental illnesses. Huge variations have existed over time about which conditions are likely to produce traumas. What are the results of traumas? Who are susceptible to becoming traumatized? And how to evaluate the claims of trauma victims. The current age of post-traumatic stress disorder is a product of changing views of the relationship of individuals to their environment.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?